If today's guest isn't your current favorite alt pop songstress, then this is your sign to transcend your past decisions. She is a multi-instrumentalist, a songwriter, and a teacher. She has 4 stunning singles and a voice that could cure your poison. She is sincerely Anne. Anne, if aliens landed and asked you to introduce them to human music, which song would you show them first?
Just suddenly what came to mind was Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush. That's kind of been popularized again, simply because it's just so interesting. It's more than a song, it sort of has made its second coming, if you want to call it that. And it's just a way of showing how pop culture also works in terms of, movies and how things in different generations can kind of pop up again. And it's a brilliant song. So
That's a good one. I've been hearing it everywhere as well. It's funny how they go in cycles of about 20 years or so.
Right, absolutely. It's a bit of a phenomenon.
Is that something that you yourself try to ride? Do you try to go with what's currently out there, or do you wait for your stuff to trend naturally?
I definitely don't try and do anything with my music. And I don't know if that's the right or the wrong approach. I actually don't think there is a right approach. I'm just kind of sure, with the production style, and there is a bit of a trend that comes out, and I often also listen to the advice of other people. But when it comes to a specific, okay, this is a goal, I just want to make art and I just want people to enjoy it. And yes, to some degree, add things to it that would get radio play more than, not adding those things. You have to kind of think of where you'd gain following and as well as money for your plays on radio.
You mentioned there just now, Anne, that there are a couple of things that you need to add in there, that would be sort of radio friendly. What are those elements specifically?
Well, you have to look at sounds that radios are currently interested in. Of course, art often follows art in the music industry. So those elements might be, if a certain, just for an example, the sort of retro vibe has come back quite a lot. In my opinion, the AHA, the band, I think they had a lot to do with that indirectly when their song, just like the Kate Bush song, started sort of getting repopularized. And those sort of retro drums, the gated snare and the toms that are super, super distant sounding, like the Phil Collins sort of drum kit, if you want to call it that. So those are some of the elements that I like to bring into my tracks, to bring what's currently popping into the sort of radio sort of sphere. And certain synth sounds. But when it comes to the actual songwriting itself and the lyrics and the sort of melodies and chord progressions, it's exactly what I want to do with it.
Yeah, I was about to actually ask, how do you make sure that it doesn't, you don't lose yourself completely, and have that those sort of radio elements just sort of be the salt, to the dish. How do you make sure that, you don't completely get lost in all the sauce in a way? Do you find it to be a tricky process to not sort of go all the way when it comes to, conforming to those radio elements? Or is it something that is just very simple?
I think that is a very good question, and it's something that I always have to make sure I'm asserting myself with, because it depends who you work with. If they're kind of a bit more forceful about their style being sort of, or their opinion of what it should sound like stylistically, if you don't stand your ground, you're going to lose that. And I think as I've grown as a person, I've managed to stand my ground in what I want for the track, what I want it to sound like, what I don't want in it. And with my future releases that are coming up now, I'm working with a producer that's very much on board with what I already have and just enhancing that rather than taking what I have and changing it into something a bit more mainstream.
I don't think we've ever gotten, such a clear-cut explanation when it comes to, an answer like that. I think when you say you stand your ground, it couldn't have been said any better. So props to you for that one.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that I've let slide for so long that it was a very conscious thing for me to stand my ground. And I think, artists can very easily be swayed if they don't know what they know can be right as well. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do things.
So then how do you typically start a song? Since you play so many roles in terms of writing the lyrics and the vocal melody and everything else, what typically comes first?
I usually start from, usually when I'm driving, I will get sort of a catchy chorus or an interesting melodic line with some unusual lyrics or some lyrics that you wouldn't imagine might go with it, that just pop into my head. Then I'll just, throughout the day, I will take little voice notes on my recorder app and just sort of record my ideas if I'm not able to write them down. I'm sure people at coffee shops have thought I'm absolutely crazy singing into my microphone in the corner there. But that's how I started, and then I'll sit down at the piano and I'll build a chord progression around it. And then I don't generally sit down and start to finish, write a song. I'll often come back to it a day or 2 or 3, maybe even 3 weeks later while I'm concurrently writing some other things. But yeah, the melody sometimes comes first, maybe an interesting chord progression. Sometimes it'll just be a punch line, like a really good sort of catchy hook of sorts. And then I'll just build around that.
I think it's really incredible what you mentioned there. And when you say that, basically when you're in your car and, you whip out the recorder on your phone or, you jot down some notes and such, how much of an influence would you actually say? I mean, obviously that would boil down to obviously technology and how advanced it is. You'll find that maybe back in the day, artists would have probably had to wait, to maybe get to studio until they get their ideas down, or they must have had to find other means, So how much of an important role would you say as an artist, like the advancement of technology actually plays when it comes to, musicians in 2022?
That's a very important thing that you mentioned there, because one kind of forgets, that we are actually in such a privileged position as songwriters in this day and age, that we've got access to technology for things like that. That being said, I mean, I have once or twice before, between students, just quickly closed my door and just quickly, played something on the piano. But it's quite a broad question you have there. That technology, let me start with sort of in the sense as a songwriter, technology. You've got access to your phones and recording and things, but also with access to YouTube, for example, I learned so much about music production software that was just free information out there, which allowed me to record my own demos and record my own cover songs for YouTube, and kind of put down a skeleton of the sound that I'm after, so that it actually create that sort of channel of song, a raw skeleton of a song, to a demo, to a produced version. And it's just sort of streamlined that process for me personally, where before it even gets to the producer, there's already a vibe, there's already an idea that he can feed off. So there's a lot less gaps in communication of what I want it to sound like at the end of the day. So that's in that sense. But oh gosh, I mean, we could write 500 books on how technology has influenced artists in all the other ways, like performance and ease of access to, music, like with digital platforms and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And it also sort of makes me wonder, if you weren't an artist in today's age, would you be making the same sort of music that you're making right now?
I think we're all influenced by what's around us. So I think if I was an artist 20 years ago, it would be very different to 100 years ago. I think classical music runs in my veins. So I think if I was born in the 1700s, I would have been one of those invisible ghost female writers that no one ever heard about, writing classical music.
Very well said. Very well said. Meagan?
Considering you have experience in the production side as well, which part of musicking do you enjoy the most?
That's a very good question. So, of course, there's the performance, there's the writing, and then there's the production, and there's the teaching, I suppose, as well. Oh, it's hard. It's really hard to pinpoint that down because it depends what stage of life I'm in. And I think artists in general, we don't have a switch on or off. I think there's an entire panel of fine-tuning knobs and buttons, and there's like a million lights. So depending on where I am, sometimes I can't even stand the idea of producing something or recording anything. I literally just want to write, and then I'm in a creative state of mind. And then other times I just can't stand the thought of writing something, and I just want to focus on teaching and just the joy I get from that. But if I had to try and choose, I would say writing is probably most of the time my favorite part. I think because there's such an instant gratification that I get from as an idea and then putting it down and boom, there it is.
Let's look at your, the classical sort of element of, you being a musician and such. Was that sort of your introduction, to making music, or was it more like something that you sort of came across having already started, making music?
No, I started with the sort of classical approach because that's what my parents introduced me and my brothers to at a very young age. I think I was about 5 when I started playing the piano, and then I started the violin at about 6 or 7 years old. And we kind of grew up quite sheltered. So most of our sort of music that we could listen to was mostly classical music. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't actually like listening to anything else at some point. But yeah, as I grew older and got exposed to more things, I sort of try to move away from that a little bit. But I still love it dearly, and I still play in orchestra now and again, and it brings me a lot of joy.
Would you say that sort of that's what also maybe led you to then, teaching? Because you did mention that, you teach music as well. Because when I think of like classical, type stuff, obviously there's a lot of discipline, that goes into that there. Obviously you did say from a very young age, you started playing piano, and then at 7 was a violin and such. So would you say that you being exposed to, classical, type elements, sort of also motivated you to be like, actually, let me sort of, dive into teaching as well?
I think what you said is amazing, because that is exactly what it teaches you. It's discipline. And I think, if I didn't have the classical background, I may have maybe even studied sort of a more, like, let's say I would have studied jazz violin or jazz piano, jazz singing, and I probably would have been a full-time session musician. But I don't really know if being raised in a classical environment and having been taught in a classic environment is the reason I'm teaching. But I think teaching is in my blood. My mom was a teacher as well, not music teacher, but most of my aunts and so on my mom's side as well, they're all teachers. Even on my dad's side, teachers and things. And I think I've got a bit of a natural knack with teaching, especially the younger ones. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%. In actual facts, before I pass on to Meags, my parents are also in that industry as well, and my wife as well. So shout out to all the teachers out there.
Right. Especially after COVID, right? With all the craziness there to suddenly adapt to.
Yeah, definitely. They went through the most. In fact, everyone went through the most. Is that something that affected you as an artist as well?
Look, when COVID struck, I was not in a massive performance stage of my career. I was more in a creation stage, a bit of a limbo at that point, actually. So in that aspect, I didn't lose too many gigs. I would have lost more because, there would have been more opportunities that I would have been ready for by the end of sort of 2020. And I did perform a little bit again. So what had really affected me the most was my teaching, because, going online, and it was actually quite okay. I think part of me was quite worried that a lot of parents would sort of, stop lessons due to financial reasons. But I think a lot of parents kept the lessons going because they wanted their children to still feel stable and grounded and have that outlet, because, I mean, everything else seemed to be falling apart around them. So I was very fortunate for that. Obviously, a lot of my adult students left building, but I managed to keep head above water during that time, luckily. And yeah, you guys, with your things, how did it affect you guys?
Yeah, so with us it was basically similar, we obviously had to adapt. I think that would be the most I think standout sort of point, because prior to lockdown and such, we were mainly just doing interviews where we would meet with the artists and such. And then obviously with lockdown and everything happening, we were sort of forced to experiment. That's why you'll even hear, like, I think some of the episodes that we did, I think in like early 2020 or so, it was our initial stages, going on Zoom and such. So they aren't the greatest in terms of quality. But it's just one of those things where it's like, it sort of had to happen, that transition had to happen in order. I mean, without that transition, we wouldn't be here speaking to you sincerely. And so it's as much as it was a negative sort of thing, I think, there was some positive elements to it. I think we all got to be grateful for those, positive aspects of, towards anything that happens, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think having to go online has actually been to the benefit for, a lot of industries, especially, teaching, and people who wouldn't normally have collaborated, even if they had access to technology, have now collaborated simply because the idea of just doing it online or doing it remotely is just so much more in the front of their minds.
Yeah, that is definitely true there, and very true.
Seeing as you released most of your discography after 2019, how would you perform a track like Poison or Transcend at a show?
So I have actually done some performances with my tracks post-COVID, sort of 2020, sort of COVID. Yeah, it depends on the type of show it is. Most of the shows that I've done are very sort of tight budgeted kind of shows. So I'll generally have either a duo, so it'll be me and my guitarist. So he will play the role of the violinist and bassist all in once for like a track like Transcend that's got that ethereal feel. And he does great with that. And I lead with the piano, of course. And then Poison, I just do a sort of stripped down version of it. But with songs like Dying to Love You and then sort of more upcoming songs, I do plan to rather perform in a way that I want to, instead of having a very small budget where we get paid very little. So I can't bring other musicians on board generally. But yeah, with a future sort of post-album release, which is coming up in a few months, then I'll probably do a whole sort of band with a bit of tracks playing in the background alongside us just to fill it up, which is still a sort of plan in the progress that I'm still chewing on. But yeah, it depends on budget. If they just want solo, then I just say, well, that's solo is what you're going to get. So I don't do back tracks especially not if I'm going to be solo.
And you just said the magic word for me. You just said album. Explain, please.
Explain. Yeah, well, the album was actually supposed to be released in 2020, 2021. But yeah, I went through a bit of a personal struggle at that point, and I had to put everything on hold. So now I am planning the album is back on the table, let's put it that way. So yeah, there's going to be a full album, and I'm super excited about it because I was initially just going to go the whole singles route till I found a producer that's really been able to guide me in a very sort of direct and sort of in a mentoring kind of way. That's just made this dream possible now.
Just to pick up on what you were saying there, Anne, that it was meant to be released in 2020, 2021 or so, and then obviously you went through the personal struggles, right? Now, would whatever it was that you were going through, would we get sort of, some of those elements within the album, or would you say that what you're going to be releasing is basically, the time period before, whatever it was that you were going through sort of happened?
Yes. So I I generally write from a personal space, from personal experience, and like any art, you kind of mold and shape and stick things on and take sort of things away to make it into a piece of art that's still gonna like stand and be relatable. But yeah, definitely and it relates to love and heartbreak and matters of the heart and the lessons that we learn from those kinds of things that life throws our way. And I think part of sort of dealing with things personally for me, I have to write about it. I have to express it somehow. And the way it comes out is usually in the form of music. And I'd like to kind of make people think differently about the lessons that they also learn. So, sometimes you'll write a song and it's actually a very immature song, but you have to get those feelings out. So I hope that sort of as the songs get released and the album sort of unravels and I can pull the pieces apart and explain them, I actually want to encourage people to see, that what I sang here is not necessarily healthy. It's not necessarily good for you, or the things I have touched on in this latest releases, codependency and how that is really unhealthy in relationships. But at the same time, the song sounds quite codependent. But I'm trying to the underlying message there is no, codependency is not great. So I do like to attach meaning to my songs, and so definitely the things that I've gone through will be in the album.
And in terms of genre, considering the fact that your singles sort of occupy different spots on the spectrum, is there going to be as much genre hopping in the album?
I like that, genre hopping. Keeps life interesting, let's put it that way. No, I am going to stick to the mostly alt pop vibe for the full album. The current releases, except for Dying to Love You, they're not even going to be on the album. It's going to be a whole new, fresh album, fresh style that is not related to Transcend, which was that ethereal classical. It's not going to have that reggae acoustic pop vibe that She's on Fire had. It's probably going to lean a little bit more towards Poison, which does have a bit of that electro pop vibe to it. But yeah, like any album, there's going to be variety from, your bigger tracks to your more stripped down emotional tracks. So there is space within that. An album in itself is like a sculpture. It is one artwork, So some of the songs will be, we'll still have violin in it, but, with the aspects that kind of tie all the songs together, like with the bass or a type of drum or something like that.
Okay, so before I get too excited about the album, I want to spend some time with the singles. I want to know, how was your experience making the music video for Dying to Love You? I know that it's conceptualized by you, directed by Ilse Moore, and I see that we even have Matt Levings from Club of Sons on the team.
Yeah, what a team. I think those creative minds together just made for such an amazing end result that if I could just put them all in my pocket and just take them everywhere with me, I would totally do that. But it was fantastic. Ilse and I have worked together before on my underwater music video with her partner, Sean. And I think what I like about Ilse and I is that we really get each other. So we can actually have good, healthy, friendly agreements and disagreements about things. But at the same time, make on-the-spot decisions and get sort of feed off each other, get really excited about things. And I don't think you always have that sort of safe person to work with where sort of egos don't get involved. And when you clash, it's really for the art, and you can always sort of get to a healthy medium. Or it's just, we've got a very, very healthy working relationship. So if I could work with her on every single project, I would absolutely. And then working with Matt was absolutely fantastic. We've been like remote friends, if you want to call it that, for a few years now. But we could never actually work together or collaborate properly in the past. So it was so nice to finally work with him. He's got such amazing, like a calm and really sort of, how can I put it? He's got a very calm energy about him, and he just has such good work ethic and professional, and at the same time very friendly and very easy to work with, which was fantastic. I can highly recommend working with Matt. And I had a fantastic makeup and hair team that I worked with as well, and then the model. Very, very, very awesome people. And it was just fun. It was just great. So we shot over 2 nights and late at night as well. And all I can say is just when you pick a good team like that, a late night or a very like hard work like that just becomes so easy, So I really had lots of fun and it brought me great joy. It sparked great joy shooting the music video.
And where's the mannequin now?
Oh, Bruce. Bruce was awesome. Yeah, he was good. Hey, love Bruce. He has sadly been put back up for adoption at the mannequin renting place. And he moved around quite a bit. But luckily, the scenes that you see me carrying him, it wasn't all of him, at least, that I carried, just the top half, really. But he played along really, really well. He carried himself well.
I know we are still on Dying to Love You, but you mentioned your music video in Transcend and, being underwater and such. How did you guys actually execute that? What actually goes into making, something like that there?
I think what helped a lot there is the fact that Ilse is already a photographer, an underwater photographer. So she's got a lot of skills. So does Sean Moore in terms of lighting things underwater. So they actually have a massive tank in their backyard with sort of a peat glass made of literally bulletproof glass for them to shoot through. They have their sort of underwater housings for their cameras, but it could only fit on certain cameras. So we weren't using those cameras. We were using a bit of a better camera that could shoot at a faster frame rate, because we shot in 4 times, I think, the amount of frame rates that you normally shoot in, so that we could slow motion it down. So that helped a lot in terms of, holding your breath and lip syncing to your words underwater. I mean, I'm not exactly a swimmer, so it really helped to shoot everything in that speed.
So overall, how much time did you actually spend underwater?
We shot that video in 3 days. I think it was usually between 5 and 7 hours in the water for each day of shooting.
That is incredible. 5 to 7 hours. How did you, did you have to do anything special to sort of cope with sort of having to go underneath, for a few seconds, come back up? Is there like a special diet that you had to go on? Is there anything unique that you had to do to prepare for that?
It was all the whey protein, man. I actually had friends pass me little sachets of, those B vitamin turbovite sort of red liquid thing, just to keep me energized. And then it was so funny. I would pop my head out the water, and my friend Ellie would pop little almonds into my mouth so that I could eat. But somewhere in there was usually a bit of a break, just to kind of, drink and eat something. But it was very, very hard. It was hard work. Hey, I was properly stiff and sore after that.
Is that an idea that you came to your team with? Like, did you say, I want to do this? Or did you sort of open the song to their interpretation and look at your options?
So Ilse and I had previously, I used to play in a band in my distant past. And she did a photo shoot for us and the band underwater. So I knew her from then. That was about 2013, more or less. And when I thought of the song Transcend, with it raining and pouring, and, the idea I had is it's raining and pouring so much that it's now flooded. So I went to her with the ideas that I had, which were a lot more intricate than it actually ended up being. But just to kind of get an idea, like what can work And then we built it from there. And she always, even though I conceptualize most of the ideas, she always brings really good things to the table that create sort of a full-on collaboration in a sense as well.
The band that you mentioned there, and is there any of that you took with you? Any other elements that you took, from that band that you now incorporate into the Sincerely Anne that we know today? What was the name of that band? Tell us a bit more about that.
That band was called Faz and the Firecrackers. It was sort of an indie folk band. So I played the keys and the violin and then backing vocals. And then I also, some occasions, would play. We didn't actually have a percussionist, so who didn't have a main instrument to play, we would just kind of circle around, play musical chairs. And so it taught me a lot in terms of just bravery to perform. I think if it wasn't for learning how to perform and just enjoy it as well, it would have been much harder as Sincerely Anne to do that. But in terms of writing, I think I learned a lot. We used to write a lot of our songs together, and that's like 5 people in one room putting their heads together. So I think it was a really, really good stepping stone for me in terms of becoming my own sort of sovereign songwriter. But when Transcend came out, somebody pointed out that they could hear some Faz and the Firecrackers in there with that ethereal sound. And I think there's definitely, to some degree, some influence that I got from working with such talented people in the past. But I don't necessarily think it's so deeply ingrained that I don't, drag that sort of experience with me in a way, wherever I'm going with my songwriting style. But it definitely was like very important lessons that I learned there.
What would you say was the catalyst for your decision to start your solo career?
That's a very, very good question, actually. I think I always wanted to go solo while I was in the band. But I kind of didn't, because I felt very loyal to the band, and that can be a good thing too. But I think you can have things both ways if you choose to. But I was just limiting myself a bit too much there. And then what actually happened was one of my closest friends, her brother, he was basically like a little brother to me, he passed away very suddenly and horribly, and it was one of those moments in your life that you question everything and you wonder what the hell you're doing with your life. Like, really? Like, you are this blob and you complain about this and you complain about that, and you're this sort of prisoner in your own mind. And it was just this wake-up call, like, life's too short. You've got to be happy, And I was very unhappy at that point. I was also teaching subjects, like school subjects, full time at that stage, and it was completely draining me. So, I mean, it's not the only reason I decided to go solo, but it was definitely the catalyst that put my mind in a place where I was brave enough to leave my job, and I was brave enough to go the solo route and start my own teaching business. So I think, that's probably the biggest catalyst.
Sure. So did you know which genres you wanted to pull from when you started the project, or did it just come naturally as you wrote?
I think my entire definition of my personality is there's generally no plan. I just wing it. So I just went with whatever came out, and I just kind of just accepted it as well. I didn't try and mold and shape it, because then I wasn't going to enjoy it. It had to be authentic. And I think that's also where the name comes from, Sincerely Anne. It's like, it's sincere. There's no, I'm not, if I change as a person, I'm going to change my music, If the song that comes out and it's a sad song, or it's a very ethereal song, the music's going to go with that. And I'm not going to sacrifice necessarily the concept just because I wanted to fit in a box, So it's going to be sincere.
I like what you mentioned there when you said that you're a person who just likes to wing it. Now, give us some of your knowledge here for someone who may also be listening and wondering, what sort of approach to take when it comes to, being a musician. What would you say some of the positive elements of being of just winging it sort of are? And what are some of sort of the negatives? I'm very similar, to you as well, in that I just want to just go with the flow, just no planning whatsoever, just go in there, you know. But what would you say from your experience are the shortcomings, if any, from that approach, and what the positives are?
I think I want to start answering this question by just quoting myself so so arrogantly. But in Transcend, I actually say, I know it's not clear, but the path will appear as you begin to pioneer. And I think that is true for just about anything in life. Yes, sure, other people have done this, but everyone's journey is so unique. You can't try and, let's say you're an artist and you look up to Jeremy Loops or Matthew Mole or whatever. You can't follow their path to get where they are. It's impossible. So just take the first step. It's still going to look dark and you're still going to be in this forest that, you have no idea where you are. But as you keep walking, you will start clearing your own path and the path will appear as you go. So the downside is it takes longer, probably, but there are shortcuts. But when you take shortcuts, you lose your authentic style, probably. Like I'm talking here about, if you win The Voice or you win Idols or you get signed into a 2-year or 3-year contract with a record label, you don't have your own say. Some people are okay with that, and that's totally fine. I mean, I've even considered if I would be okay with it, and it all depends what you're after. But I think if you're doing something because you love it, you are most likely going to want to do it your own way. And I think at the end of the day, you'll feel so much more proud of what you've achieved if you've done it yourself, rather than fit into everyone else's boxes. And possibly not for everyone. I'm just a very individualistic person. Potentially that's why I'm saying this. But if you're fitting squeezing yourself in the boxes of other people, you're going to look back and you're going to resent your journey, your achievements, because it's not going to feel like your own. And if you love music, you might end up hating it, and you're just going to have to see what can you live with at the end of the day. I'm going quite deep and I'm using quite extreme examples here, but that's just my perspective on it.
Looking at, obviously when you started out, there must have been, you mentioned there that if someone looks up to say like a Jeremy Loops, for example, when you initially started out, there must have been someone that you looked at and you were like, well, I'd love to be in, a similar position, to X artist, right? And then you mentioned that, it obviously takes longer if you carve your own path, and that, you may start out in a forest type place. I want to know what stage you're on as Sincerely Anne. Are you currently, deep within the forest? Have you sort of maybe reached that stage where you're now on the same level as the person or artist that you were looking, up to? Paint a picture for me.
I've decided to make friends with all the wild animals in the forest. Because I think you put so much pressure on yourself as an artist to get to some sort of end goal. Like, okay, I must get from A to B or A to Z. There is no end result. I actually saw a post from Mark Manson. I'm sure you know about Mark Manson, fantastic writer, sort of more like on the personal development side of things. And one of the things he said is, if you achieve your dream, the dream's gone. Like, you've done it now, it's over. So where I am currently in the forest on the path is, I've realized that you don't get through the forest. There's no main road that you reach. There's no conclusion. Because if you end sort of on a high note and you've achieved the thing, then are you doing it for acclaim? Or are you doing it for popularity? Or what's going to validate you? So for me, I just see it as a journey that's probably never going to end. It's just, finding beautiful things and writing about it, finding the hard things and making them known and getting people to relate to them. And it's just commentating on the journey as I go. That's how I sort of see where I am now. You put money into marketing or getting it on radio, but it's also, to me, when I get the news from my PR company that, it's been playlisted on this radio, that radio, or it was rejected by this radio for anything, good or bad, I just go, oh, cool. Okay. I'm not like dead set on an achievement or an end goal. I'm just so going with the flow of it. And then in terms of an artist that I look up to, well, let's say when I was first starting out, I was an avid follower of Imogen Heap, brilliant female artist from the UK. And I just really loved how she would just have fun. She would basically just play with music. And then she would release it as art, and people would buy it and enjoy it. And just to kind of play. I that's one of the things I liked about her. So I'm not trying to be famous like anybody. I'm not trying to sound like anybody. And when I get inspiration nowadays, sometimes it's a song that gets played automatically, algorithmically by Spotify. I don't even know who it is. And then I'll be like, wow, this is so cool. And then I'll just take something that I like from it. And then it's probably going to show up in a song 10 years from now, or it's going to show up in some sort of aspect of the music or whatever inspires me. It's not something I just consciously do all the time, but there's no specific person necessarily.
But before I pass on to Meags, I just want to express how I think it's incredible. I've just picked up, obviously a similarity between something that you just said now about the journey, being so important, and it not being about, the destination at all. Something very similar was said by Mani Badu, funny enough, who is a hip hop artist, completely different, to what you're doing. And she said something very similar where she was like, you spend all this time trying to get to the destination. And it's like, once you get to the destination, it's like, now what, So it's always best to just focus on, the journey and the things that you're doing, currently, because that is the most fun, stuff that's, in the forest with the animals is where the fun is at. So yeah, I totally agree with you and what you just said.
Cool.
As someone who's performed in orchestras and bands and as a solo artist, I'm wondering, what is the biggest difference in the crowd culture at these shows?
I wish you could see my face now. Crowd culture, I think my performances that I've done as Sincerely Anne are very vast. So I think maybe I'll just sort of summarize it as a band experience from Faz of Firecrackers as well as Sincerely Anne. Sometimes these gigs are at bars, or sometimes they're as an opening act for other musicians. And then you kind of sort of that main artist draws their crowd mostly. So, or like at festivals like Splashy Fen, it's really, really fun people. And I think, if you think of an orchestra concert, those are fun people too, but that's a different kind of fun for them, and definitely a difference in the age demographic there, which is, I don't know if it's sad or if it's just curious or interesting. But yeah, I wish we could actually see more young people at the classical sort of concerts. But there's nothing sexy about classical music compared to going to a festival, for most people. So I think that sort of summarizes what I have to say there.
Make classical music sexy again. It's the new change.org
Yes.
petition. We're launching it. It's happening.
How are we going to do that, Meagan? How?
I don't know, but we'll try. We'll try really hard.
We'll think about it. Next podcast, we'll have some solutions. We're going to come up with some really crazy ideas. I like it.
If someone wanted to learn an instrument, seeing as you're a teacher, which one would you recommend for a beginner?
I think probably piano, or maybe guitar. But in terms of getting a very good grounding, piano's much easier than most instruments in the sense where you can visually see from left to right, low to high. You can see exactly where the sharps and the flats are, which makes theory a lot easier. And music theory is also based on treble clef and bass clef, mostly in the beginning. So if you're learning, if you want a good average instrument to start with, definitely piano. I actually started that way on piano first, which helped me when I was learning the violin because my ear was already tuned and I already knew the theory of the treble clef. enough to have an understanding of what's up, what's down, what's a semitone, what's a whole tone. So piano, definitely.
So not violin.
Well, not violent either. Does that make sense?
I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's just like a happy, healthy medium is like
Yeah.
the average thing. I would say that's a good start would be piano.
And most like software also has the piano roll.
Yeah, that's a great point there. Depends what you want to do. If you wanna be purely an instrumentalist, do the saxophone, do the violin, do a solo instrument, like a melodic instrument like that. But if you want to be a singer one day, learn the piano and the guitar and accompany yourself.
Just one quick question, guys. Your students, and do they listen to your music? If they have listened to your music in the past, what has their feedback sort of been? Do they enjoy your music at all? If obviously they have listened to it.
I don't think many of my students know or have listened necessarily to my music. I don't necessarily prescribe it as material to go and look up or listen to. But on occasion, I think, their parents would see like a status update or something like that. The feedback is usually been positive. And one or two little students have thought I'm this very famous celebrity. And then I'm just like, no. It's okay. I don't really know what to do in those sort of circumstances. But yeah, just kind of, if it does come up in a lesson that they saw it, like, well done, I just kind of, say, okay, well, it's just, it's a thing that I do that anyone can do. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're brave enough. So I don't like encouraging that sort of pedestalizing me, if that's even a word, because, part of being a teacher and part of being in the arts is wanting the children to view expressing themselves using music as accessible and possible, and just because it's perhaps on a radio station doesn't mean it's hard or it's impossible,
I totally get what you're saying there, Anne. But I mean, at the same time, if you look at the fact that I saw that one of your videos as well is somewhere in about 4.3K, views and such. When you see those numbers, like what goes through your mind? Because I'm sure, when you started out, you must have had some sort of goals in terms of, the audience that you want to reach or how many people, your music sort of reaches. But when you see such a high number in the thousands, 4,000 actual people watching your videos and such, does that not sort of say to you, or would that not maybe validate, when they say to you, oh, you're actually famous, our teacher's famous and such?
I think it's such a subjective thing, what you consider making it as an artist versus a struggling artist, or what you consider as popular or not popular, or famous or not famous. When I see numbers like that, I say, where's the subscribers? Come on, don't just watch and subscribe, please. I don't know. It's just, it doesn't really do much for me or to me. It's just, I think it just relates back to, when I get the news that I'm on a radio station, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm happy. I'm not unhappy, but I'm just like, okay. So it's not like I think something very, very big and monumentous about the numbers like that. But I think what validates me is when, I think it's actually on that same video where somebody commented and she said that I think she was struggling with mental health or something, and this music video just sort of gives her the will, or the music itself gave her the will to live, and it was so encouraging and the message was so positive. Seeing things like that, and that's what makes my heart tickle, Yeah,
the engagements. Definitely. I feel like having that sort of feedback and having, the people that listen sort of interact, it's of so much value, compared to just the streams and such. So it's really incredible. With that being said, Anne, I'd like to just thank you for joining us on the show. We're almost out of time, so this would be the perfect point to plug your social media handles. And as I said, Meagan, I would just like to thank you for joining us on the show. Really appreciate this opportunity that you gave us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nasiphi and Meagan, for the opportunity. And, I've listened to parts of your other podcasts, and my heart's really grateful that you are using your time to elevate artists and to just to help us actually learn from each other, because I think that's priceless,
Hey, anytime. The pleasure's ours. And obviously, as I always say, Sludge Underground wouldn't be, a thing if it weren't for the artists and everyone that listens to the show. So we really appreciate that. So if anyone who wants to get in touch with you, Anne, what are your social media handles and where can they find your music?
Yeah, so on Instagram, it's just sincerelyann._.music. Facebook, they can just search Sincerely Ann, they'll find me. My music's on Deezer, Spotify, iTunes, everywhere, all the sort of digital platforms. It's on some radio stations as well. So even on Jacaranda, they can listen there. And there's a whole list. If they really do listen to the radio, they maybe just send an SMS to your radio station and ask them to play my song, because maybe that's what we need. But otherwise, just to contact me, just going through my social media profiles is the best way to contact me at this point.
That is awesome. And obviously with Sludge Underground, it's www.sludgeunderground.com for all things Sludge Underground. I think it's best that we close out obviously with your brand new music video, Dying to Love You. We obviously got to play the audio for that, but do check out the music video on YouTube. And that's basically it. Thank you once again, Cecilia Ann, for this opportunity, and for anyone that's listening to this, thank you for tuning in. It is bye for now.
How could two people be so intertwined? Even so, we haven't talked in a while. Do you even know who I am now? I don't know where your mind has gone. It's anywhere but here. And you won't tell me. I'm dying to love you, but you won't let me in. I'm dancing alone now. I'll carry you home if I have to. Let me love you. Let me love you, my dear. Have a seat. I wanna know your wildest thoughts. Wanna know the hardest thing your life has taught. Pretend there's moments all we have now. Let's talk about where our minds can go everywhere at once. But you won't let me. I'm dying to love you, but you won't let me in. I'm dancing alone now. I'll carry you home if I have to. Let me love you. Let me love you, my dear. The look in your eyes says you'd rather be somewhere else. For the person I know the best, to feel like a stranger. I feel I have no choice but to let you go and set you free. 'Cause every time you leave the door, my heart meets my feet on the floor. I'm dying to love you, but you won't let me in. I'm dancing alone now. I'll carry you home if I have to. Let me